Welcome to the podcast, Whiskey and a Map. Stories of adventure and expeditions as told by those who live them. I'm your host, Michael Reinhardt. As an adventure photographer, I travel to the world's wild places to learn about the people, cultures, and wildlife that inhabit them and bring back their stories. It has been said that many adventures and expeditions started simply with a map and a glass of whiskey, a desire to go and see the world's wild places. You're invited to pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, and join us as we hear stories from another one of our friends just returned from the field. George Kourounis travels to the world's most remote and inhospitable corners of the earth to document the extremes of nature. An award-winning explorer, one of the best-known storm chasers, and the host of Angry Planet. He has spent 25 years documenting the world's most fearsome forces, vicious tornadoes, the eyes of hurricanes, and inside erupting volcanoes. He holds the title of National Geographic Explorer and is an explorer in residence for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. George, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much.
Now, George, as a icebreaker and as a tradition we have here at Whiskey and a Map, do you have a good drinking story for us?
A good drinking story. Wow. Well, numerous, for sure. I remember very fondly being on the summit of Ambrym volcano in Vanuatu in the South Pacific. And we had just done a 1,200-foot descent down inside this massive crater that's deeper than the height of the Empire State Building, down to the very bottom where there's this boiling, churning, violent lake of lava. And I had made sure to stash a bottle of scotch in with all my expedition stuff. And when we came back up, the sun had set, the crater of the lava in the crater was illuminating all of the gas and the clouds around us. So we're surrounded by this orange glow. It was like being on some other alien world and just sitting there having a nice glass of scotch in this most remote part of the world, feeling like I just returned from another planet. That was a drink that I will remember for a very, very long time.
Isn't it amazing that it's not always so much the drink, but it's where you had it and the experience that goes with it?
Yeah, it's the context, right? It's just it's the catalyst for the conversation about the situation where you had that drink, right? It was the people you were with. It was the thing that we had just done. It was this monumental task that took no small bit of effort, let me tell you. And the fact that we were in this surreal landscape with no trees, nothing surviving around us, just with this, gurgling volcano behind us and this orange sky. It was chef's kiss.
Cool. Well, that begs the question, what were you doing there at the bottom of the volcano?
Yeah, well, I specialize in traveling around the world and documenting extreme forces of nature and natural disasters. So tornadoes and hurricanes and avalanches and floods and hailstorms, but that also extends into things like volcanoes as well. So I've been documenting volcanoes and traveling to them and going down inside them since about 2004 now. And this particular island, Ambrym Island, which very few people have ever heard of, has the highest concentration of lakes of lava in the world. They're a really rare phenomenon. There's only at any given time between half a dozen and maybe 8 or 9 in the world total. And on this island, I've seen at least 3 on this one island alone. And so I've gone back to this island numerous times over the years, teaming up with some colleagues from New Zealand and other parts of the world. And we would frequently bring people down as guides. Think of like a mountain guide climbing Mount Everest, but instead of climbing up, you're climbing down. So I would act as a guide, and we would live on top of this volcano for weeks at a time in tents, getting pelted with acid rain from this really intense location, because the rain that falls, it goes through the gas cloud that's belched up by the volcano and creates this really potent acid rain. So it dissolves your tent. It's hell, but I love it so much. And so we would take people from around the world. Sometimes it was television crews. Sometimes it would be scientists. Sometimes it would be, we brought an IMAX camera down to the bottom of this crater. Sometimes it was just people who were interested in volcanoes, and we would teach them how to descend down on these ropes. And we had all this technology to do it so safely. And I've made over the years 11 descents down to the bottom of that particular crater. So yeah, it's kind of like a home away from home. But then a few years ago, I think it was 2018, late 2018, there was a big explosion and the lava lakes are now gone. And as a matter of fact, the campsite where we used to set up no longer exists. It was completely obliterated by this big eruption. So it was a good thing I wasn't there at the time, or else I would have been reduced to molecules.
The cave in Kenya and the elephants.
Oh, yeah. So people frequently, one of the questions that I get asked the most is, what was your scariest situation? And so, in my mind, that story changes from time to time. And sometimes it's about, well, I was in the middle of Hurricane Katrina and that was pretty terrifying. Or the time when I was chasing the El Reno tornado in 2013, which still holds the record for the largest tornado ever documented, 2.6 miles wide. This thing was a monster. Killed some colleagues of mine. But I keep coming back to this story of Kidam Cave in Kenya. So it requires a little bit of setup. So there's this cave in the mountains on Mount Elgon, and it's famous for two reasons. There are herds of elephants that for many generations climb up, take through the jungle. It's dense jungle there, up to these caves, and they go into the caves and they scrape the cave walls with their tusks. And they chew the rocks. It's old volcanic pyroclastic flow deposits. So it's very mineral rich. And so they chew those rocks to get minerals in their diet. And there's no other place in the world where this behavior has been documented. And they've literally excavated this cave over thousands of years to enlarge it. It's really fascinating. And you can see the tusk marks on the walls. So I wanted to go there and try and capture these elephants going into this cave. But the problem is this cave was also the epicenter for 2 outbreaks of Marburg hemorrhagic fever, which is the first cousin of the Ebola virus. It has all the same symptoms, basically. So if you catch it, you start getting a headache and fever, and within about a week or so, your internal organs have liquefied and you bleed out of every orifice in your body, right? So it's probably one of the worst ways that you could die. And we don't know exactly how it gets into humans, but we know that bats carry it. And this cave, Kidam Cave, it's home to a roost filled with these Egyptian fruit bats. So I brought with me a bat biologist, a guy who's mapped these caves. There's several on this mountain, and literally the best guy in the world. And we had Tyvek coveralls and surgical gloves, and I had a respirator mask and eye protection, the whole works. And we're going into the back of this cave. And Peter is filming, so it's dark in the cave. So what does he do? He flips his light on his camera on, and the bats start freaking out. And now thousands of them are leaving their roost and flying straight towards us. And we're getting splattered by them because they're emptying their bladders and their bowels on us as they're flying past, right? So it's like this shitstorm.
Literally.
These bats, literally. And I look over to Don McFarlane. He's the biologist who I had with me, and he had managed to catch one of these bats. They're literally crashing into him. And I figure, I'm the host of this TV show. I can do this too. So I step into the stream of bats, and they're hitting me now, and I grab one of them and I bring it over to Peter because I want to get close up of this bat. Because that's, in my mind, I'm thinking the story that we're trying to tell of this cave, right? So I'm in television mode. I'm not in self-preservation mode. And the bat bites through my surgical glove and into my thumb. And now it's like, did I just die? Do I have a week left to live? Am I going to bleed out of my eye sockets to death, at some point over the next few days? And that was freaking terrifying because it wasn't over in an instant or an hour or a day. It was a full week of not knowing if I was the walking dead, as they say.
Just waiting for that incubation period.
Well, yeah, and I would just keep taking my temperature, and we were, because we had such small budgets making that Angry Planet TV show, we were continuing on from Kenya to Uzbekistan to film in a very remote part of Uzbekistan at the dried up Aral Sea in the north, near Kazakhstan. And there's not really some good hospitals in remote, rural, far northwestern Uzbekistan. So, all these things are going through my head at the time, right? And so, yeah, that stuff adds up. Sometimes when you're faced by these gigantic things like a volcano erupting or a supercell storm that's putting down a tornado, you can see the big picture and you can take evasive action. But sometimes it's the invisible microbiological things that'll really take you out. And I've had dengue fever before, and I've had other infections from traveling to remote parts of the world and jungles and things like that. And that's the stuff that scares me.
George, there was one spot that you went to that really fascinated me, and it involved cave and crystals. Can you tell us about that?
The most beautiful place on planet Earth. And I'm not even joking. There's this cave in the Chihuahua Desert of Mexico, about 900 feet underground. And it was accidentally discovered 24 years ago by silver miners in a little town called Nika. And as they were drilling away deep underground, they broke through into this chamber, and it was filled with the largest crystals that any human has ever seen, the largest crystals in the world. And some of them are 55 tons and 30 feet long. They're like thick tree trunks, and they're white. They kind of look like gypsum, but they're not. They're made of selenite, they look like quartz, but they're actually crystallized gypsum, which is selenite. And the environment in this cave is as deadly as it is beautiful. There's air temperatures in the range of, 50 Celsius. So we're talking 123 to 126 degrees with near 100% humidity. So you've got the heat of the Sahara Desert combined with the humidity of the Amazon jungle. And that's because there's a chamber of magma about 6 kilometers down, and it's heating the groundwater, and that groundwater seeps up. And there was this void in the earth that with this hot mineral-rich water that sat at the perfect temperature for over 500,000 years. And it created these gigantic crystals. And I remember the first time I ever saw a photograph of this place. I was on Vancouver Island, and we were doing a big caving expedition there. And one of the guys I was caving with had a paper binder with all kinds of notes in it. And he opened it up, and there was this laminated page with a big picture of this crystal cave that I'd never heard of before. And the millisecond I saw that photo, it's like, I'm going there. I don't know how and I don't know when, but nothing is going to stop me from going to this place. It's just so breathtaking. And so, about maybe almost 2 years later, we finally got permission to go there. And I say you have to get permission because it's actually on private land. It's owned by this mining company. And we got permission to go there for 1 day. And that's it. It's very dangerous. It's incredibly hot. You start dying. As soon as you enter the cave, you start dying because it's so hot and humid. It's hotter than your body. So you can't radiate your heat out. You sweat like crazy, but it's so humid it doesn't evaporate. So you're going to succumb to a heat stroke really fast. Plus, just like taking a cold beer outside on a hot day, you get that condensation that forms on the beer glass, right? Because it's cool compared to the hot, humid air outside. Well, the same thing happens inside your lungs. That's the coolest thing around in that cave. Oh, wow. So you get condensation that can form inside your lungs. And so we had to wear special, literally ice-filled suits that had these little ice packs and these vests, and we would wear those, and we had a special chilled air respirator. So on our back, we had these big contraptions with canisters of ice with fans that would blow that cool air up through a hose to a mask that kind of looks like the kind that a fighter pilot would wear. And even with all this equipment, we could only go inside the cave for maybe 45 minutes at a time. And so to get to the cave, you get in a van. It's so weird. You get in a van and you drive into the side of this mountain on these tunnels, and you spiral down on this road, and it takes like 40 minutes or something to drive down because you're slowly getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth.
So you're driving inside the mine?
You're driving inside the mine, yeah, totally. And you can hear explosions because they're setting off dynamite, and it's an active mine. These guys are still mining for silver and lead as well. And so as you get deeper, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And you finally get down to the level where the cave is, and you get out, and there's a staging area where they have all the freezers and everything to keep all the chilled suits nice and cold. And there's a big steel door. And behind the steel door, you walk in, and it's like Superman's Fortress of Solitude. It totally looks like that, which I believe was at the North Pole, if I remember correctly. But this is quite the opposite. It looks the same, but it's unbearably hot.
Well, take us that moment. The steel door opens. You finally get a chance to walk in. What do you see and what are you feeling at the time?
The humidity hits you like a hammer. Like it's so much worse inside the cave. And when you go in there, your eyes just try to process what it's seeing. Like what your brain is trying to figure all this out, right? It's like, what is this? I've seen crystals before, but I've never seen anything like this. And you're sweating so profusely, and you know that your time is limited, and you know you have to be extremely careful because there's these sharp crystals everywhere. If you trip and fall, you could literally impale yourself on a gigantic crystal. So you're on this mission, again, like going to another planet, right? That's sort of my specialty, is going to these places that are like going to other planets. It's like I find all the science fiction places on planet Earth and I go there. That's sort of my raison d'etre, if you will. And this is no exception. And you're literally climbing on top of these crystals. And the whole cave it's not huge. It's about the size of a basketball court. And every step you take, you just can't believe what you're seeing. And there's evidence of a big earthquake that had happened there at some point. There was this one large crystal that had fallen and snapped in half like the world's largest piece of dry spaghetti. So you could tell that this cave has undergone some violent moments at some point in its history. And it's just beautiful.
Now, do you think have they found other similar caves like that?
There are other caves there in that mine. So at shallower depths, there are other caves with smaller crystals. There's a place called the Cave of Swords. And there the crystals are maybe a couple of meters long, right? So they're big. But the deeper you get into caves that have bigger and bigger crystals. And this is the mother of all crystal caves for sure. But who knows how many other caves there are out there in the Chihuahuan Desert like this, right? It was literally accidentally discovered when someone drilled into it. And so there might be another one. There might be dozens of them. There might be hundreds of them there, 300 meters down below the desert. We have no idea how common this natural phenomenon is. And if you've ever seen a geode, like you see those amethyst geodes where you got the purple crystals inside, right? And this is basically a geode, but it's the size of a basketball court with these white crystals. If you're listening, do yourself a favor, hop onto your favorite search engine and just type in NICA, N-A-I-C-A, Crystal Cave, and your socks will be blown across the room.
Yeah, what an amazing experience just to be in there and actually be able to touch it and see it and experience in real life, just not seeing a picture.
Exactly. And the place is not accessible anymore. The last I heard, it had flooded and the groundwater has returned. So you can't even get access to the cave anymore. So who knows if it's ever going to happen again. The actual miners have these gigantic pumps that they use to pump out the groundwater, not to drain the cave specifically, but in order to mine for silver at deeper parts of the mine. And there was some kind of accident. There was a flash flood or something. And some of these pumps got damaged and they didn't bother replacing them. And so that part of the mine, including the cave, is now underwater.
George, you mentioned the fire pit in Turkmenistan. What's that all about?
Yeah, the doorway to hell. It's this most bizarre place in the middle of Central Asia in the former Soviet Republic of Turkmenistan. So they have a lot of natural gas. It's their number one resource. And at one point they were drilling for natural gas out in the Karakum Desert. And the entire drilling rig collapsed into a sinkhole that was about 100 feet deep and 230 feet across. And at some point, this fire pit, this leaking methane gas, or it wasn't a fire pit at the time, it got lit on fire. We don't know exactly when or how. And it's been burning for about 5 decades now. So you've got this crater of fire out in the middle of nowhere. And I wanted to mount an expedition and lead this project for National Geographic to go there and gather soil samples from the bottom, looking for any type of bacteria or microscopic life living at the bottom of this hot methane crater, because NASA has discovered planets outside of our solar system that also have a hot methane-rich environment. So my pitch to National Geographic was looking for alien life here on Earth. And so I had a science grant from the National Geographic Society. I had a TV crew. It took the better part of, I would say, over a year and a half to secure permission to go to Turkmenistan. It's a very difficult country to bring a television crew into. Very oppressive dictatorship, similar to North Korea. And North Korea gets more tourists every year than Turkmenistan does. No one goes there. It's a wild place. And so I had the plan, or the idea was to stretch fire-resistant ropes across the entire span of this crater. And then I would go out to the center wearing special heat protective clothing, this reflective suit that you would wear if you were working in a steel mill, self-contained air, and a bunch of other specialized equipment, and then drop down to the bottom, gather soil samples from various places at the bottom of this burning pit, and then get those samples analyzed looking for any type of DNA down there.
So at the bottom of the pit,
yeah,
there's fire and it's burning from all the methane, but there's soils in there that's coming through, and you're going down into that to get the samples for NASA and for study?
Yeah, precisely, right? So, yeah, it's literally, if you're standing at the edge of this thing, at the top, and you're looking down, it looks like a volcano crater, but it's not. It's not lava. It's burning methane gas. So it's a pit filled with thousands of fires. These little fires are burning all the way everywhere inside this crater. And there's a few quite large fires as well. And that's where this methane gas is seeping up from underneath and breaking the surface inside this crater. And it just perpetually burns. It's like this eternal flame, if you will. And the locals call it the doorway to hell. Darvaza means doorway. And it looks like the devil himself is going to come jumping out of this crater with his pitchfork and his horns and tail and the whole works. And let me tell you, the first time I saw this place with my own eyes, we had assembled the team, spent all this time training and preparing and getting permission, and all the equipment, some of the specialized equipment was handmade. And we finally arrived there, and I walk up to the edge and I see it for the first time, and I feel the heat. And my first thought was, I can't do this. It's impossible. This is way too difficult and way too dangerous. So that's off to a great start.
Well, that's the rational part of your brain kicking in right there.
Well, yeah, that's the self-preservation side of things, right? And I've never been accused of being burdened with common sense. But in that moment, common sense sort of kicked in, and it's like, okay, this is not a thing a person can do, right? But I've been working on this for years. I had this huge TV crew. I had a team of 5 other people working with me, rope rigging crew, logistics person. I had a scientist. I had a microbiologist from Chicago was there with me. He was going to be the person that analyzes the samples that I gather. And so I had all these people counting on me. So what do you do in that situation? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we set up our camp and we started studying the crater really closely. What is the heat patterns doing? What's the fire doing? We had this special temperature probe that was built for me by the engineers at National Geographic. And so we put it on ropes and we would send it out over the crater, and it would wirelessly transmit the temperatures back to us. So we could drop it down using these ropes in different parts of the crater and get a 3-dimensional idea of what's going on with the hot air. And that was really important because now we understood what's happening. So the fires heat the air in the crater, and that hot air comes up the sides, and then cooler air drops down to replace it in the center. So it's like, okay, this is good to know. The best place to drop down is right in the dead center, which is great when we're filming a TV show as well. So that's going to be the most dramatic as well, right? So, okay, so that's the one time where sort of like the science and the art like came together quite nicely. And so the time finally came. We had done a bunch of tests with the ropes and such. And now it was time for me to go out on the ropes. You're standing at the edge of what is called the door to hell, and you're going to take that step, literally stepping off into this fiery abyss, if you will. And at that moment, you have to put all of your trust in the process, in the people, in the technology, the equipment, your training, everything. And you take that one step. And the ropes held, and I was able to roll out on pulleys to the very center of this crater, and I was in control of my own descent. I started to drop down, and I could see the flames getting bigger and bigger, and I could see my colleagues getting smaller and smaller. And I'm in this suit that's very cumbersome and very awkward, and I feel very much like an astronaut about to set foot on Mars. And I set foot on the bottom in a place where no human's ever been before. And at this point, the clock is ticking. I only have a certain amount of air in my respirator to get the job done and get out safely. And so I've got an earpiece in. Dr. Stefan Green, the microbiologist, is telling me exactly where he wants me to gather these samples from. And as I'm digging into the ground, fire is coming out of the hole that I'm digging. So I'm opening up new channels and pathways for this methane natural gas to come out. And I go over to the largest flame and I stick my temperature probe into the ground right beside it. And I'm measuring a temperature of over 700 Fahrenheit, 400 Celsius. So, that's about as hot as a pizza oven, if I'm not mistaken. Like it's it's pretty toasty down there, to say the least. And, I had about 17 minutes worth of air. That was it. I brought a special heat resistant camera down with me. So I put that down there and gathering all my samples, and I've got these alarms on my harness. And the harness is custom made out of Kevlar so that it wouldn't melt, and my alarms are going off, telling me the quality of the air is poor down there. And then my low air alarm is going off on my tank. And that's when you know it's time to leave. But you stop for a moment and just pause, standing at the bottom in the middle of this coliseum of fire, knowing that 12 people have set foot on the moon, but you're the only person to have ever gotten this particular view that no one had ever seen before. And you just have to drink that in. And then I gave the signal to my colleagues, and they were in complete control of my ascent. We had designed the rope system that way, and they were able to pull me up and out. And it was a really great feeling, setting foot on that solid land up at the top. And there were a lot of high fives, and we had gathered the samples, and we found stuff living in the bottom of this crater. There's all kinds of, not tremendous amounts. It's obviously a very harsh environment, but there are extremophiles living down there. These bacteria and archaea that are microscopic, but they're thriving in this hot methane-rich environment, and we have no idea how they got there. So,
or how they survive,
and do another expedition.
Wow.
But yeah, what an amazing, amazing place. It's so hypnotic. You stand there at night looking down into this crater. We camped there for about a week, and it's just mesmerizing.
That is so dangerous. And you've gone to so many dangerous places and exposed yourself to weather-caused dangers, the tornadoes, the hurricanes. How do you navigate that fine line between, I'm going to make the call to descend down into the gates of hell versus when to know to call it and say, this may be a little too extreme? How do you navigate that knife edge of danger and survival?
It never really comes down to a single moment. It's an ongoing process of risk management, assessment and management, really. And I've actually been invited numerous times to give talks to insurance conferences talking about risk management, because I sort of have kind of a unique perspective on it. And during every expedition, whether I'm chasing tornadoes or whether I'm climbing mountains in North Korea or going into a crystal cave, I am constantly assessing what dangers might happen. A lot of the times when you're going to really remote places, like the doorway to hell, there are all of the hazards that you can imagine, but then there's hazards that you can't imagine because no one's ever been there before. So you have to try and predict. And there's no Amazon delivery for equipment there, right? There's no Walmart nearby. So if you need something, you have to have it with you. So it's a continuous process of trying to figure out where the line is and how close am I to that line. Have I gone over that line? And what do I need to do next? So when I start to feel afraid, which I do, people think I'm fearless, but that's about as far from the truth as you could imagine. When I become afraid, that tells me that, okay, I need to reassess my situation. Do I need to stand my ground? Do I need to double check my equipment? Do I need to GTFO, right? And flee. So yeah, it's not a fine line. Like you say, it's a razor thin line, but it's not. It's always very gray. If I'm going to chase a hurricane, if I'm filming a hurricane, there's always going to be some moment during that storm where even if I decide to leave, I'm still going to get impacted by that storm. So there's always going to be some kind of point of no return, if you will. And so you have to plan for that and account for that. And you kind of have to know where that is and know when you're cut off from that point. Okay. Now I'm stuck here. I'm not stuck, but I'm going to have to ride this out no matter what. Right. So your strategies change at different points in that gray, nebulous risk zone, right? As, the danger zone, as Kenny Loggins would call it. So yeah, it's a nebulous process.
Yeah. Most explorers, adventurers that I've talked to, the successful ones, which means the ones who survived, almost to a person have always said it comes down to risk management. And they spend a lot of time going over the details, the what ifs, because they know they can't negate the risk, because then otherwise it wouldn't be exploration or adventure. But they spend a lot of time with risk management. And that's what saves your life.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's funny because, like, for example, with the fire pit in Turkmenistan, because no one had ever gone to the bottom, I tried to study that crater as much as I could in advance. And this was back in 2013. There were not a lot of photographs of this place. And so I had literally downloaded every single photo on the internet that existed at the time of this place. Like, I could close my eyes and I could tell you every little nuance. I could tell you where all the fires were, where, like, I knew this place like the back of my hand, right? And when you're planning for a big thing like that has a lot of obvious dangers, those are the ones that you can address first and most easily. One of the biggest problems I had was getting my air tanks filled in the country of Turkmenistan, because that became very difficult and I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. The fittings didn't match the North American hardware that I had, and there's all kinds of problems like that, right? So you try to plan for these. We eventually were able to get the tanks at least partially filled by someone from the U.S. Embassy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who had a scuba compressor. Like, it was, we were desperate. You don't realize how much you take air for granted until you can't get it, right? So that was wild. But then there's all the little things that you sort of forget about. Things like driving in foreign countries, the traffic, getting sick, eating something that doesn't agree with you, right? If you're suffering from food poisoning and now you got to suit up in this suit and go down into a pit of fire, things are not going to work out so well for you, right? So sometimes it can be just the tiniest little thing that can just knock you off your game. So you have to plan for the big stuff and the little stuff as well. And you just never know what's going to happen. And I've been sick numerous times on expeditions. I was going through Siberia, going to the coldest town in the world in the middle of winter. And I was very sick in the process of doing that, which was unpleasant. So yeah, you can never eliminate the risk. You can only mitigate it, manage it, and, try and plan for all the things that are obvious and the stuff that's not obvious.
Be very adaptable and ingenious on how you figure out the problems.
Yeah, and Adam Savage from Mythbusters has a great saying that I embrace as well, and that is, failure is always an option. Right? I mean, the whole idea of failure is not an option. That is such BS. Failure is always an option. It's so true, right? Like, you do everything you can to try and be successful, but there are often forces beyond your control that you can't anticipate that will stop you dead in your tracks, right? So, I've got to try and be realistic as well. And there have been expeditions that I've been very fortunate in that I've had very few complete failures. We were flying to Newfoundland one time to intercept a tropical storm. And as I was in the plane flying over to Newfoundland, the storm diverted, went out to sea, and it was gone, right? So there's things you just can't account for.
Yeah. Now, in the beginning, you said that you travel around the world to go to these extreme environments, these extreme weather phenomena, and bring back their stories for people. What do you hope people learn from what you do and what you document?
Well, a few things, actually. I want people to get an appreciation for how beautiful our natural world is, right? We live on the only planet that we know so far is inhabitable. And because of so many things, so our atmosphere, plate tectonics, all these different forces, that allow us to have sentient life here on planet Earth. Well, these forces are still ongoing, and they're dramatic, and they shape our world, and they can be dangerous. And when they affect human populations, we call them disasters, when they're just really just forces of nature. It's planet Earth doing planet Earth stuff. But some of it is so beautiful. And even some of the dangerous things, like seeing a tornado touching down and seeing a storm that produces that tornado that looks like a giant upside down wedding cake in the sky that's twice the height of Mount Everest. These things are beautiful, but they're deadly as well. So I want people to not only appreciate the beauty, but I want people to understand the risks. And by showing people how bad can be in the middle of a hurricane or a tornado, the effects of these things, then hopefully they will take appropriate measures the next time one of these phenomena is headed for them, right? So indirectly, hopefully trying to get people to take care of themselves, but also I want them to take care of our world, our planet, right? And so by showcasing these beautiful, amazing forces of nature that inspire the emotion of awe, right? We don't get to experience the emotion of awe all that often. It's pretty rare in our lives. We go from our climate-controlled house to our climate-controlled car to our climate-controlled office, or we don't even do that. Sometimes we're working from home now. So many people. And so we don't get the opportunity to see these places that often and have that emotion of awe, seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. So what I do is I try and find these most awesome places in the most literal meaning of the term awesome, invoking that feeling of awe. And showcase, I'm looking up at my map right now. I have this gigantic map above my desk, and every dot, every pin brings back a flood of memories of all these amazing places that, as I was sort of mentioning before, that's the catalyst to get people interested in conserving these places as well, being interested in nature. And if me showing people the wrath and the power of some of these amazing, beautiful forces of nature gets kids interested in science and nature, well, then I've inspired the next generation of conservationists who maybe got interested in what I was doing, but maybe went in a slightly different direction and is now doing, I don't know, big cat rescue or local conservation, saving local wetlands or whatever, right? I just want kids to be interested in the natural world and to get out there and put their phone down for a few minutes and get outside and appreciate what we have before it's gone, because it's disappearing pretty quick. We're losing species at terrifying rates and habitat loss and the effects of climate change. I mean, we're seeing some pretty devastating, catastrophic weather and storms. And it's not, that trend is not going anywhere anytime soon. So helping to raise awareness in those regards as well. So I feel like I have, I wouldn't say a burden on my shoulders. It's more like a mission. It's my reason for doing what I do. And I enjoy it so much.
Oh, it's such cool work. What's on tap for you next? What's your next project?
Well, I do a lot of television, obviously. That's one of the mediums that I use to get my message out. And I'm doing a lot of filming recently now, doing some stuff for CNN coming up. I'm doing some stuff for Smithsonian Channel, the Weather Channel in the US. And I'll be tornado chasing in the spring. I can't wait for the total solar eclipse happening, coming up in April. Everyone who has the opportunity to go and witness that, please do. They are more stunning than you could possibly imagine. It's great.
Well, for people that you inspire, they look at you and they go, I want to do something like that, especially the younger generations. What advice would you give them to be you someday?
I'm conflicted in that because some of the things depends on the person. Some people might consider the things that I do to be reckless and that I shouldn't be inspiring the next generation. But I would combat that by saying I take safety very, very seriously. And in all of my expeditions, I've never broken a single bone, never had an overnight stay in hospital, and I hope to keep it that way. What I would love is for kids to be inspired the same way that I was inspired when I was 10 years old. My heroes were guys like Jacques Cousteau, Maurice and Katia Kraft.
I was a big Cousteau fan.
Absolutely. And I've gotten to meet members of the Cousteau family subsequently, which is great.
Oh, wow.
I got to meet Jean-Michel, and I got to meet Fabien Cousteau. And that was just a tremendous pleasure to me because I every Sunday I would watch Cousteau, and I wanted to be a marine biologist. And my father was a diver in the Greek Navy, and I was a diver. I got my scuba license when I was 19 years old. And so I had been inspired in that regard when I was young. And so the only person that I really try to impress is 10-year-old me, and to try and be the person that I wanted to be inspired by when I was that age. And so that's part of my mission.
I was actually a guest on a podcast not too long ago, and somebody asked me about something similar to that, about how people do these reckless things. I said, I tried to explain to them, it's like running a marathon. You don't start out running 26 miles. You do a couple of miles. And then you add a couple more. Then those first 2 miles that seemed really hard the first time, now get easier. It's a progression. You just don't go from couch to descending into the gates of hell in one step. It takes a long time to train, to gain the experience.
Exactly. And what you're describing is expertise, right? And expertise is gained through experience, through knowledge, through study, through repetition. And I can look at the sky and I can tell you what's going on. I can look at a volcano and I can give you a pretty good idea of what's going on. And I can tell which way is the storm moving. Is it likely to produce a tornado in the next few minutes? Is it strengthening? Is it weakening? Which direction is it moving? How fast is it moving? And I can determine all of that with a glance, right? Because of all that time and effort that I put into it in the past. Same thing as a pilot or a brain surgeon or any other person that has expertise in a field. Doesn't matter what you do, right? Every person has expertise in something because they have been passionate about it, right? You put me in that situation. If you put me in, behind the controls of an airplane, I would endanger everyone's life because I don't know what the controls do. And I can't pick up on the subtle things that a trained pilot with expertise would pick up in a heartbeat. Oh, the flaps are down. Oh, those flaps need to be up, right? I would just think, okay, we're hurtling towards Earth and we're all going to die, right? Because I can't pick up on the subtle nuances, but I can in the situations that I specialize in. And that provides me with a cushion of safety and comfort that critics don't recognize, right? And so that goes just as much for any occupation, right? Whether you're, like you say, a marathon runner, right? Oh, you're crazy to run a marathon. How do you do that? Well, you don't get up off the couch and run a marathon, or very few people do, right? I'm sure someone has, but it's not the proper way to do it, right? So I try to do these dangerous things in as safe a manner as possible. And there's always going to be danger, but we've talked about risk. You mitigate it, you manage it, and you move on.
Well, I think the beauty of what you do too is you generate that curiosity about our planet and about nature. And once that curiosity is sparked, people want to look at it and appreciate it. And once you get the people there, they say, this is something we need to protect. We need to pay attention. Whatever political spectrum you are, I go up into the sequoias and it's a wonderment to see. And it's something that needs to be protected. Or like you talked about the Grand Canyon. I remember being there in the wintertime, hiking to the edge, very first time. And as I start getting there, all of a sudden you see this gap in the earth open. And as you get closer, it opens and opens and opens. And when you get to the edge, it's so awe-inspiring. It almost looks unreal. But then you see these places and you just go, yeah, they need to be protected. No casinos on the rims. No, they need to be pristine and preserve them.
Absolutely. And you hit on something really important, and that is the value of curiosity. And I see, you think of love and hate. Okay. So what's the opposite of fear? Well, curiosity is the opposite of fear, right? I frequently try and find like these opposite emotions, and it's fear that will push you away from something, whereas curiosity will draw you towards it. And the more you're drawn towards it, the farther away you are from fear, right? So I find it really important to nurture and foster that feeling of curiosity. And I think the most important 3 words that anyone can say to a child or anyone who has curiosity, and I think it's the bedrock for all exploration, is 3 simple words. Let's go see. Let's, implying that this is a communal effort. You and I, we're going to do this together. It's not just me. It's a team. And then go. That implies that there's some journey. We're going to go on an adventure together. It might be to the library. It might be to the computer to look something up on the internet. It might be halfway around the world. It might be to outer space. And then see. Let's go see. Let's make a discovery. Let's maybe see something that we've never seen before. Let's learn. Maybe something that no one's ever seen before. So I think that all of exploration and the idea of curiosity-driven learning can all be summed down in those 3 simple words. And that's what I sort of live by.
Well, George, how can people follow your exploits and keep up with what you do?
I try to. I'm not a huge fan of social media, but I do post regularly. I'm on all the regular social media channels and such. But if you go to my website, which is furiousearth.com, there'll be links there to my YouTube channel and Instagram and everything. So that's a one-stop shop for all things George adventure related.
Yeah, you've done so much good work. There's a lot out there. I really encourage people to find it. I hope you inspire the next generation. Well, I know you're going to be inspiring our next generations of explorers and scientists. Good work on you too. Good on you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to share some of my stories with you.
All right. Thank you, George. And it's been a real pleasure. We'll see you on down the road and keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhart.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures for the wild places of the world.